Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into the shocking reality behind global charity today. We've all been sold this really beautiful vision, right? If wealthy nations just give enough cash to developing ones, we can literally wipe out global poverty. It sounds logical, it sounds noble, and honestly, it's what the world has believed for decades. But as you're about to see, the actual data tells a vastly different story.
Let's kick things off with a staggering number, $5 trillion. That's the sheer amount of money pumped into developing nations over the last 60 years. To put that into perspective, that is a massive fortune. It's genuinely enough wealth to completely rebuild an entire continent's infrastructure from the ground up. Yet, despite this massive ocean of capital, the dream just hasn't materialized.
But here's the brutal paradox the real-world evidence reveals. We're looking at a pretty cruel reality. Often, the more financial aid a country receives, the poorer and more stagnant it actually becomes. It's like this life raft of foreign aid morphs into a toxic poison that actively destroys local economies. So how on earth does that happen? You see, this paradox isn't just some isolated fluke. It spans decades, it crosses continents, and it traps totally different economies in the exact same vicious cycle. We're talking South Vietnam in the mid-20th century, African nations like Zambia and Mozambique in the 90s, disaster relief in Haiti, European bailouts in Greece, nation building in Afghanistan. According to the analysis, the underlying mechanics of failure are, honestly, remarkably consistent across the board. Think of it like this. Imagine you're the mayor of a small town drowning in debt. Suddenly, a wealthy stranger rolls up with briefcases of cash. He offers to pay your debts, build new schools, the whole shebang. But just as you're popping the champagne, he whispers, "Hey, vote for me next election. Oh, and by the way, I'm building my massive private broadcasting antenna right smack in the middle of your town square." Foreign aid is rarely just pure empathy. On the global chessboard, it operates exactly like that rich man buying leverage. Take the Greek debt crisis from a little over a decade ago. Greece was teetering on the edge of default, right? So the EU steps in with this massive bailout to, quote-unquote, save the country. But our source analysis breaks down how this bailout basically did a legally mandated U-turn. The money went into the treasury in Athens and immediately did an about-face right back into the vaults of French and German banks to pay off old debts. The cash never stayed to boost Greek production. Greece was basically just a transit station for recycling debt. And this perfectly highlights the hidden cost of conditional aid. Greek citizens were slammed with skyrocketing taxes and slashed pensions just to pay for this whole money recycling scheme. But wait, it gets worse. To actually secure these funds, the Greek government was forced to sell off its most vital, money-making infrastructure to foreign corporations. We're talking their busiest port going to a Chinese conglomerate, another major port to a Franco-German alliance, and 14 highly profitable strategic airports literally handed over to a German company. Now, contrast Greece's forced fire sale with Vietnam's approach during its economic opening. When international organizations offered aid to Vietnam, they demanded massive privatization of state assets in return. But the Vietnamese government played it smart. They strictly filtered these international loans, and they adamantly retained state control over critical lifeblood sectors like energy and telecommunications. They essentially prioritized their national sovereignty over quick cash. So, in any functioning society, you have a core social contract. Citizens pay taxes, and in return, the government builds roads, schools, and stays accountable to the taxpayers. But when a government's budget relies heavily on foreign aid instead of its own citizens' taxes, that link is totally severed. Suddenly, the leaders don't really need to answer to the public anymore. They only really care about keeping their overseas donors happy. And that broken accountability is the ultimate breeding ground for massive corruption. The analysis points to historical examples, like how military aid in pre-1975 South Vietnam was routinely siphoned off through inflated troop numbers. Fast forward to Afghanistan in the 21st century, and we see the exact same playbook. An estimated 300,000 totally non-existent ghost soldiers were kept on official payrolls. That generated immense aid dollars that quietly funded luxury villas in Dubai, all while real soldiers on the ground didn't even have basic supplies. But hey, the corruption isn't just a local problem. An ASEAN report cited in our source material drops a truly mind-blowing metric. A staggering 61% of global aid simply evaporates before it even reaches the people who need it. 61%! It just gets swallowed up in this sprawling maze of NGO administrative fees, foreign consultant salaries, and endless layers of subcontractors. Honestly, nothing captures this bureaucratic waste more shockingly than the aftermath of the 2010 Haiti earthquake. The American Red Cross raised nearly $500 million for reconstruction. $500 million. Yet years later, after all the high-paid foreign consultants, the luxury hotel stays, the endless strategy reports, they built exactly 6 permanent homes. 6. The humanitarian funds essentially fed a bloated international bureaucracy instead of housing the actual earthquake survivors. Let's look at the microeconomic impact of what are called in-kind donations. Just imagine millions of pairs of free shoes or shirts get dropped into a developing region. At first, the locals are thrilled, right? Free stuff. But what do you think happens to the local cobblers and tailors? They go bankrupt. Because no matter how skilled you are or how hard you work, you absolutely cannot compete with a business rival whose products cost exactly $0. The data from Zambia proves this devastation crystal clear. Back in the 1990s, well-meaning Western charity drives flooded Zambia with huge bales of used clothing. Now, before this, in 1991, Zambia had 140 bustling textile factories employing tens of thousands of people. A decade later, crushed by the influx of free charity clothes, that number plummeted to just 8 factories. The charity effectively wiped out an entire domestic industry, leaving citizens permanently dependent on handouts.
Okay, you might be thinking, well, what if we just send clean, transparent cash? Unfortunately, that introduces a macroeconomic nightmare called the Dutch disease. When billions of dollars of foreign currency flood into a small economy, those dollars have to be converted into the local currency to pay local workers. This massive, sudden demand artificially spikes the value of the local money, which basically makes everything that country produces incredibly expensive for the rest of the world to buy.
We saw this play out tragically in Mozambique during the 1990s. Foreign aid flooded in, hitting an unbelievable 60% of their GDP. Naturally, their local currency's value skyrocketed, and as a direct result, their primary domestic export, cashew nuts, became way too expensive on the global market. International buyers simply fled to cheaper countries. Local factories shut down, and the exact money that was meant to save the country ended up suffocating its self-reliance.
The source highlights groundbreaking economic research, which actually won the 2019 Nobel Prize, by the way, that advocates for throwing out the old model completely. No more top-down mega projects, no more NGO middlemen taking 60% cuts, and definitely no more market-destroying in-kind goods. The solution is remarkably simple: direct cash transfers, straight into the bank accounts of the poorest individuals. Studies in Kenya prove just how powerful this is. The research showed that when you directly give cash to impoverished citizens, they don't waste it. They use it immediately to pay for their kids' tuition, buy nutritious food, and purchase goods from local merchants. Instead of suffocating the local economy with free imports, this method injects real purchasing power into the community, stimulating domestic businesses from the bottom up. It perfectly aligns with a traditional proverb the source brings up: how you give is more important than what you give. The ultimate goal of any genuine aid has to be eliminating the need for aid entirely. It's about building institutional transparency and self-reliance, rather than fostering this permanent, toxic state of dependency. Which leaves us with a profound and, frankly, pretty challenging question. A developing nation's true future only really begins the moment it dares to cut the umbilical cord of foreign aid and stand on its own 2 feet. But, given all the geopolitical leverage and systemic power we've discussed today, are the massive donor countries and organizations ever truly ready to let them go? It's definitely something you need to take away from this and think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it completely changed how you view global charity.